Growing up, my younger sister, Caroline, and I never got along. Our parents always encouraged competition, grades, sports, even friendships. At first, I thought it was normal. But as we got older, the rivalry turned into something uglier. She didn't just want to succeed. She wanted to see me fail. By high school, we barely spoke. That suited me just fine. When I left for college, I felt relief. Without her around, I could finally breathe. We only saw each other on holidays, where we exchanged tense nods and the occasional forced small talk before retreating to opposite corners of the house. It was a Cold War, and I had no interest in breaking the silence. Then, I met Daniel. We had been friends for years, and when he finally asked me out during my senior year, I said yes without hesitation. He was kind, funny, and made me feel safe in a way I hadn't realized I needed. After graduation, I moved in with him, landed a great job, and for the first time, my life felt like it was mine. 3 months into dating, I decided to introduce him to my parents. I barely thought about Caroline. I assumed she wouldn't be there. But when Daniel and I arrived, she was already home, lounging on the couch like she owned the place. Her eyes flicked over Daniel, and something in her expression changed. A slow, calculated smile. I felt the first prickle of unease. Dinner started off tense, but manageable. Daniel was polite, trying to make a good impression, and my parents, for once, weren't comparing me to Caroline. But she wouldn't stop staring at him. Every time he spoke, she leaned in closer, twirling her hair, laughing too hard at his jokes. It was so blatant I felt embarrassed for her. At first, I tried to ignore it. Daniel knew our relationship was strained, and I didn't want to make things worse. But then she crossed the line. She tilted her head at him, eyes glinting with something that made my stomach twist. "So, Daniel," she purred, "if you had met me first, do you think things would have turned out differently?" Silence. My father cleared his throat. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Daniel, bless him, looked horrified. No," he said, glancing at me like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. I forced a laugh, but my hands were clenched under the table. "Caroline, what the hell?" She shrugged, all fake innocence. "What? I'm just saying, people have options." That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I set my fork down carefully and turned to face her fully. "Are you serious right now? You're actually hitting on my boyfriend? In front of me? In front of our parents?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax. I'm just having fun. No need to be so insecure." "Insecure?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're the one throwing yourself at someone who clearly isn't interested." She smirked. "Maybe he just hasn't realized he has choices." I saw red. "You're pathetic," I spat. "Maybe if you actually focused on your own life instead of obsessing over mine, you wouldn't be such a miserable failure." Her face darkened. The next second, she lunged across the table, grabbing my hair and yanking hard. Plates clattered. Someone gasped. For a moment, I was too shocked to react. We hadn't fought like this since we were kids, and even then, it had never been this violent. But as soon as the shock faded, I fought back. I shoved her off me, sending her stumbling into her chair. Chaos erupted. My father was yelling, my mother trying to pull us apart. Daniel grabbed me, physically dragging me toward the door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Even as I was being pulled away, Caroline sneered at me. "You always think you're better than me," she shouted. "But you're just scared someone might see you for what you really are." I didn't know what she meant. I didn't care. Daniel got me into the car, gripping my hand tightly as he drove us home. He kept glancing over, as if checking to make sure I was okay. I wasn't. I stared out the window, still shaking, my scalp burning where she had pulled my hair. That night, I made a decision. Caroline was no longer my sister. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from my parents. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I picked up, more out of exhaustion than anything else. "We talked to Caroline," my mother said without a greeting. "She knows she overreacted." I almost laughed. Overreacted? She attacked me, but I wasn't surprised. My parents had spent our entire childhood brushing off her worst behavior. "She wants to apologize," my father added, but his voice lacked conviction. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. Then she can call me herself? A pause. My mother sighed dramatically. You know how she is. Yes, I did. She was the type to wait until everyone forgot, until it became my fault for not moving on. She's embarrassed, my mother continued, and she's going through a tough time. You know she's been struggling with school, and she's having a hard time making friends. And that's my problem because… I cut in. My mother let out a sharp breath. Because she's your sister. No, I said simply. Not anymore. That was the end of that conversation. The next few weeks passed in silence. My parents, realizing I wouldn't budge, stopped calling. I didn't see Caroline at all. It was perfect. Then the holidays came. Daniel and I had been together for almost a year by then, and I wanted him with me for Thanksgiving. My parents insisted Caroline would be civil. I doubted that, but I figured we could get through one meal without disaster. I was wrong. The second we arrived, I knew something was off. Caroline greeted Daniel first, a bright, almost manic smile plastered on her face. She barely acknowledged me. Dinner started tense. Caroline made an effort to insert herself into every conversation Daniel and I had. When he mentioned work, she suddenly had a million questions. When he talked about our weekend plans, she interrupted with her own stories. Daniel played along politely, but I wasn't stupid. I saw what she was doing. Then, as if she hadn't learned anything from the last time, she smirked and said, You know, Daniel, I really think we would have gotten along if we met under different circumstances. Silence. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the trap being set. I did meet you, he said carefully, and I remember you being incredibly rude to my girlfriend. I nearly choked on my drink. My mother's face paled. My father coughed into his napkin. Caroline's expression twisted for just a second before she forced another smile. Oh, come on, she said lightly. That was forever ago. Daniel didn't smile back. 3 months ago isn't forever. Caroline blinked. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't used to people calling her out. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to admiration for my boyfriend. Caroline's gaze flicked to me, and I saw it, that familiar resentment. She hated that he had chosen my side, that no matter what she did, I had something she couldn't take. Dinner ended quickly after that. That night, I told Daniel, I'm done trying. He kissed my forehead. You don't have to try with people who don't deserve it. I blocked Caroline's number the next day. 6 years passed. 6 years without a single word between us. Family gatherings became a careful dance of avoidance. Caroline and I existed in the same rooms, but never acknowledged each other. We didn't fight, didn't make scenes. We were strangers, and I liked it that way. My parents had mostly given up trying to fix things. Every now and then, my mother would bring up Caroline in passing, a casual, she's been asking about you, or, it's such a shame you two don't talk. But I never took the bait. If Caroline really wanted to talk, she could have reached out at any time. She didn't. That told me everything I needed to know. Life moved on. Daniel and I built a life together, and when he proposed, it wasn't even a question. He was the person I wanted by my side forever. Wedding planning was hectic, but I was excited. Everything was falling into place. And then, my bridal shower happened. It was supposed to be a small, intimate gathering, just my closest friends, a few relatives, and Daniel, because I never cared for the outdated, no men allowed rule. Everything was going perfectly. Champagne, laughter, gifts. I felt surrounded by love. Then the door opened, and my parents walked in. With Caroline. The entire room went silent. My stomach dropped. She looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see her, which meant only one thing. Our parents had lied to both of us. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. What is she doing here? My mother gave a tight smile. We thought it was time for you two to make amends. I stared at her. At my bridal shower? Caroline shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the guests. People who had no idea what was going on but were now witnessing whatever this was. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. You had no right to do this. My father sighed. Sweetheart, it's been 6 years. Don't you think it's time to move on? Move on. Like it was that simple. Like Caroline hadn't humiliated me, physically attacked me and spent years pretending I didn't exist. I turned to my guests, my voice calm but firm. Since my parents want to rewrite history, let me remind everyone what actually happened. I told them everything. The dinner, the flirting, the fight, how she grabbed me first, how she never apologized, how I had to decide that night that she wasn't my sister anymore. When I finished, the room was dead silent. My parents looked mortified. Caroline's face was blank, but her eyes burned with something. Anger, embarrassment, maybe both. I took a deep breath. So tell me, would you just move on? No one answered. Caroline's jaw tightened. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out. My mother hesitated, looking between me and the door like she was deciding which child to follow. In the end, she went after Caroline. My father sighed, shaking his head like I was the unreasonable one, and left as well. I stood there, feeling the weight of every emotion hit me at once. Then Daniel squeezed my hand. My maid of honor raised her glass. To family, huh? Laughter broke the tension. The party continued, but I knew this wasn't over. My parents wouldn't let it be, and I was right. I didn't hear from my parents for a few days after the bridal shower. It was a relief. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized that forcing Caroline and me back together wasn't going to work, that I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. I should have known better. 5 days after the bridal shower, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but some small, stupid part of me wondered if she was calling to apologize. She wasn't. The second I answered, she launched into a frantic rant. "You have to fix this," she said, her voice tight with urgency. I blinked. Fix what? She let out an exasperated sigh, like I was the one being difficult. "Your aunt won't return our calls. She won't hire Caroline, and it's your fault." That caught me off guard. "What are you talking about?" She rushed through the explanation, clearly trying to make me feel guilty before I had time to think. Caroline had lost her job months ago due to layoffs. She had been struggling to find something new and, after running out of options, had moved back in with my parents. My mother, determined to help, had talked to my aunt, who was opening a new business and had originally planned to hire Caroline for a marketing position. But after hearing everything at the bridal shower, my aunt had changed her mind. I almost laughed. I had no idea my aunt was even considering hiring her. But after everything Caroline had done, I wasn't exactly shocked that she wanted nothing to do with her. "You need to talk to her," my mother demanded. "Tell her you exaggerated. That Caroline isn't." "I didn't exaggerate," I interrupted. She hesitated. "You made her sound unstable." "She is unstable," I said flatly. "Or did you forget that she physically attacked me?" "She was young," my mother snapped. "People change." "Oh? Did she change in the last 5 days? Because I don't remember hearing an apology." Silence. Then, my mother's voice turned sharp. "This isn't about the past anymore. She needs this job. If you don't fix this, she'll never forgive you." I almost dropped my phone. She will never forgive me? My mother didn't answer. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the phone. You know what? Good. Because I stopped caring about her forgiveness a long time ago. And with that, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. I had spent years trying to ignore how much my parents favored Caroline, how they always found ways to excuse her behavior while expecting me to be the bigger person. But this was different. They didn't just want me to forgive Caroline. They wanted me to lie for her, to undo the consequences of her own actions. And I wasn't going to do it. I blocked my mother's number. I knew this wasn't over. My parents never gave up that easily. And once again, I was right. A few days passed without a word from my parents. I knew the silence wouldn't last. My mother wasn't the type to let go of something she thought she could control. And sure enough, one evening, as Daniel and I were getting ready to head out, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. My parents. Daniel sighed. "Do you want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "No. Let's just get this over with." I opened the door but didn't step aside. "I'm busy," I said flatly. "Make it quick." My father looked irritated, but my mother jumped in before he could say anything. "We need to talk." I didn't move. We already did. Not about the job, she said. About Caroline. I clenched my jaw. What about her? She hesitated, then stepped aside. That's when I saw Caroline standing behind them. For a second, I just stared. I hadn't seen her since the bridal shower. She looked different, tired, hesitant. Not the smug, overconfident version of her I was used to. I'm not here about the job, she said before I could accuse her of it. I need to say something. I exhaled sharply. If this is another setup? It's not, she cut in quickly. I swear. Daniel nudged my hand. A silent question. Do you want to do this? I sighed. Fine, but make it quick. I stepped back, letting them in. My parents looked smug, like they had one, but I ignored them. Caroline stood awkwardly near the couch, shifting her weight like she wasn't sure what to do with herself. I crossed my arms. Say what you need to say. She took a slow breath. I was awful to you. I didn't respond, just waited. She swallowed. Growing up, I felt like I was always chasing after you. No matter what I did, you were always ahead, better grades, more friends, more praise. And instead of just working on myself, I made you the enemy. I kept my face blank, but my heart was pounding. Hearing her say it out loud felt surreal. She hesitated, then continued. And that night when you brought Daniel home, I don't know. Something in me snapped. I wanted to prove I could take something from you. That I could win for once. She let out a small, humorless laugh. But I didn't win anything. I just lost my sister. For the first time, she actually looked regretful. She turned to Daniel. I'm sorry for how I acted. I put you in a horrible position, and it wasn't fair. Daniel nodded, but didn't say anything. He was letting me take the lead. Caroline shifted back to me. I know I should have apologized years ago. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it. She looked like she was bracing for impact. And honestly, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent years resenting her. Years assuming she would never take responsibility, never care enough to acknowledge what she did. And now she was standing in front of me, doing exactly that. Part of me wanted to shut her down, to tell her it was too late. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from carrying this anger, wasn't so sure. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just apologized. I let out a slow breath. I don't know what you expect me to say. Caroline nodded, like she had already accepted that. You don't have to say anything. She glanced at our parents. And just so we're clear, I didn't come here because of them. My mother looked slightly offended, but Caroline ignored her. She stepped back toward the door. I won't bother you again. And just like that, she was gone. The room was silent. My parents were still standing there, waiting for me to say something, maybe hoping for a dramatic, sisterly embrace. Instead, I turned to them and said, "You can go now." My father's mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. They left without another word. As soon as the door shut, Daniel wrapped an arm around me. You okay? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I don't know. And for the first time in years, that was the honest truth. The wedding came faster than I expected. Between finalizing plans, managing last-minute details, and trying to not think about the whole Caroline situation, I barely had time to process that it was actually happening. I never told my parents they weren't invited. I just didn't reach out. I didn't block them, didn't fight, didn't argue. I let them sit in their own silence. A few days before the wedding, they sent me an email. Not a call, not a visit. An email. It was full of self-pity, claiming that Caroline and I had demonized them, that they had done their best, and that since we clearly didn't appreciate them, they would step back and let us live our lives. I read it once and deleted it. No response. No reaction. The wedding day was perfect. The venue, the flowers, the people. I had never felt so surrounded by love. And then, just before the ceremony started, I saw her. Caroline. She sat near the back, quiet, not drawing attention to herself. She didn't try to approach me, didn't push for some dramatic reunion. She was just there. And somehow that was enough. After everything, we weren't magically sisters again. We weren't best friends. But we weren't enemies either. That night, As Daniel and I drove away, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more resentment, no more anger, just peace. And that was more than I ever expected.